So you need to sign up participants for a game that you and your team are building, but you realize that you need some way to identify each individual participant, other than using their name, of course, because for obvious reasons there may be multiple participants that may have the same name. Your team manager suggested that you use a unique identifier for each participant, but the thing is they've insisted that you use some sort of alphanumeric value. Realizing that you're a programmer, you decide, oh, I could just code my way out of this. Hi, what's up? Nonzo here. Today we'll be looking at how to create a unique identifier program so that we can open a program, type in how many unique IDs we want, and then get a text file on our desktop populated with the amount of unique IDs that we've asked for. Alright, without further ado, let's jump in. We're going to be doing this in Python, but this can also be done in JavaScript, Java, and all the other languages as well. Here we have a Python file with a definition of a function that we're going to fill out. We're going to be calling this function uuid_gen, and we're going to have a main block at the bottom as well. Now, you might be thinking, I have to figure out some sort of way to generate this random alphanumeric character that is of n length so I can use it in the rest of my program. You could go down that route and write a function that generates this random alphanumeric character that is of n length and all that jazz. But we're programmers, and programmers are sometimes lazy, and there's really no need to rewrite a function that is also publicly available for us to use that does the exact same thing. Python has a uuid module we can import and use to generate these unique identifiers. These identifiers that are generated are alphanumeric values that are separated by dashes. There are many versions in this module that we can use today, but today we'll be using version 4 of the uuid generator. We can generate a uuid by calling the uuid_for method on the uuid module and simply assigning it to a variable. It is, however, important to know that this returns an instance of an uuid class, so it has to be converted to a string for it to be used inside of our print statement. Now we can print out a uuid. Note that every time we run this program, a different ID is generated. Now, you might be thinking, if I just stick this inside of a loop, I can generate as much UIDs as I want, provided that this loop is still going. And you'd be absolutely correct. We can create a function that takes in a number and then returns a list of UIDs where the length of the list is equal to the number that was passed into the function. So let's do it. We're going to create our new empty list that is going to store our UIDs and have a count variable and set it equal to 0. We're now going to create a loop. Inside our loop is going to run as long as the count is less than the number that was passed in. Inside this loop, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to generate our UID and convert it into a string. We're then going to add that ID to our list that we created above. Then we're going to increment the count by 1. Finally, we're going to return the fully populated list. Now that that's done, all that's left is to write all the items in our list to a file and save it to our desktop, and we're done. Okay, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Before we do any of that, we first need to grab the input from the user. We can do this by using the input function built into Python and asking the user a question. How many UIDs do you want to be generated? It is important to know that the input function stores all the responses in the form of a string. So before we can use it in our function, we first have to convert it into an integer type. Now we can store it as a separate variable, but for this case, we're just going to do this inside the function call itself. Speaking of, we're now going to call our function and then store the return value inside of a variable. Remember, this is a list of unique identifiers where the length of the list is equal to the number that we passed into our function. Now we can open a new file in write mode and specify where we want to save it to the desktop. We do this in Python by using the open function. We're now going to loop through a generated list and write each item in the list to the file. It's also a good idea to add a new line character so that each item in the list is on its own line. Finally, we need to close the file, add a print statement saying that we're done, so to signify that this operation is finished. Now we have a way to generate a list of unique identifiers and save them to a file on our desktop. Now if you're wondering, we've just automated this process, meaning that if our game gets very popular, we have a way to assign unique identifiers to each participant in our game by only answering one question. This was super fun to code out, and if you want to check out a written version of this, I've linked a blog post in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.